Well, hello and welcome on this very ugly afternoon. I remember the first time I was here in this school, it was about 10 years ago. I had also a small lecture, but the weather was much nicer then. It was spring and sunny and yes. Yeah, just for those of you who haven't heard of my work, of my office, I just explain very shortly what we are doing and where I'm coming from. I was born in Bregenz. This is the capital of Vorarlberg, which is the western part of Austria, close to Switzerland. I started school there. I, after school, worked as a stonemason at my father's company for a few years. But then I thought I would like to do something else, and I started in an architectural office there, in a small local one. And I found out that this is the right thing for me to do, so that I wanted to study architecture as well. So I moved then to Innsbruck, which is about 2 hours away from there. Studied 3 years in Innsbruck then, the first part. And after that, I thought, okay, let's move one step further, and I went to Vienna. And I ended my studies then at the Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna. That was in 2003, and from that time on, I started my own office. It more or less happened accidentally. I participated in a small competition right after my studies, and actually I won it, so I had to open the office, and well, once you start something like that, it continues and continues, and well, that's where we are right now. I would today talk a bit about my understanding of architecture and how it developed, and what I see as an architect in the moment as quite some important questions. Where are we? Where are we coming from? Where are we going to? And this is more or less what I wanted to show you today. Well, when I'm walking around in, for example, Vienna or all the other places that I see, I always see a very big difference of building culture that you could see, say, 100 years ago or even further, and that we see right now in the last decades. These are some examples that I just took very fast pictures of on the way to some construction sites. And I always wonder, it's not so much about the buildings, but it's about the ethics that people have in mind when they start project, and they do. For example, this here, it's like a cemetery, and this was an open field here till 3 years ago or something, and somebody built in here this fuel station. And you would really think about, okay, but how is it possible in our days that somebody is allowing anybody to build something like this? What did we lose as human beings to make something like that possible? You all know these examples. It's not very special examples. It's just something that I saw, and I just took it as some examples about where we are standing in the moment with our building culture. And then I came to the idea to think about what could we do to change this. And I got to this movie. I guess you all know it. It's Back to the Future. It's a movie from the 80s, and who knows it or who doesn't know it? So everybody, okay. It's about this guy who sits in a car and travels back in time. And he ends up in the year 1985. And he starts in the year 85 and he ends up in 55. That's it. And what is happening is that when he starts here, he moves back into past, and there happen a lot of things that he didn't expect. But with his influence there, what he's doing in that time, he changes all the other things that happen. So when he gets back to the present time, he finds himself in a different present, which means also in a different future, because of this delta, that is just a small difference between one story and the other one. And then, of course, because this movie was so successful, they did a second one, so there he's going into future, and then backward, and because he knows about the future, he's able to change the present, also something that would have not been able if he didn't knew about what will happen. And I really think, when I think about this change of time, I thought about the interesting fact that also some things only happening in the movie already changed our real life. So for example, this is this hoverboard. It's a part of the second part of this movie, when he's in the future and he's coming back then. And actually, about 10 years after they created the movie, and it was only a special effect in the movie itself, a company got so interested in this idea that they were really developing this and were able to build it after 10 years then. So already, even only with the idea of the movie, our reality changed. And I guess you are thinking, okay, but what has it to do with architecture? What I want to talk about is this point where we are right now. I always feel that if we are here at the present, that there was, in the middle of the last century, there was an enormous step or fall down of quality, of building culture. And I'm not talking about some specific buildings. We all know these very beautiful examples of architecture. It's not about that. But I'm talking about the idea of architecture itself, of building culture and what we are doing as a whole society. It's not about these small icons that are coming out of our society as a result of some really brave and strong architects, but it's about what we all are doing, what you guys as architects will be like in the future, and how you are able to develop your country or any other country where you're going to in the future. So from that point on, it will be a question, okay, where are we heading to? And how big will be this delta that we are able to change? And therefore, I think it's always very important to understand where we find our references. Because if we always behave like somebody, okay, that's what is happening in the moment, and I do whatever I can see, just maybe a little bit better, it changes very slowly. And especially in architecture, it is so important that you have the right references to develop further. I always see it with all the clients that I'm talking to. If you're talking very abstract with them, it's something they hardly understand, some better, some worse. But as soon as you are able to show them some examples of architecture that they can grip, that they can see and smell, they can talk to the clients, for example, it's something that changes their mind much faster and much stronger. So therefore, I think it's so important to live architecture in reality. To be able then to get the right references, as I said, and therefore it's really important, where do we take our references? Is it somewhere with a maybe lower quality or higher quality, or what are our references in general? Because the only thing that we have to consider is, what is this delta that we want to produce? Are we just going forward in a way that we are doing right now? Are we able to go to a plus or even to a minus of quality? And there, for me, these basic structures of the mountains of our countryside, it's always a very strong reference, for example. So these are the houses that are built in the mountains close to where I'm coming from. And it's not so much about the, say, the form or the way of architectural language, but it's more about the idea and the understanding of architecture, what I think is so important. Because these people were dealing with very difficult conditions. They had to build up there in the mountains. It was very strong winters. They only could afford what they had just around. So that's what they took. They took the few stones they could get to build the foundation, because it's important to lift the wooden structure out of the ground. And then they started to build with wood because it was just easier to get. You can see all around here the trees. It was lighter, it was more easy to construct with, it was very easy to change some parts then. It was better for insulation, etc., etc. And it was something that after the period of time that the wood was used, it could very easily go back into nature. So all these structures were built in an idea of a very strong connection to the physical conditions that they had. And also it was an architecture that developed for a very long time. So it was something that was not just an idea of a few people, but it was really some kind of development process that took hundreds of years to get better and better. Because all the things that didn't work out very well, they were just separated. And everything that worked well, they kept going with. And another part that I'm also always mentioning is that also these houses, for example, as simple as they were thinking so much about the building concept in terms of energy. So in most of the pictures, you could see always this huge amount of wood that would lay in front of the houses. And it was so a physical, visual part of their everyday life that everybody had to think about, okay, how am I getting through the winter? The less wood I have to cut, the more time I can spend for other things that will help to the daily life. And therefore, they came up with a very simple building concept with one heating in the middle of the house, where you could cook, where you could heat up the central part. And even then in the evening, you could open a small hole in the ceiling, and the last bit of energy would go up to where the people were sleeping then. So you could use every single part of energy up there. And that's what we are also trying to do now with our concepts and buildings. For me, it's always very important that we always think also the energy concepts right away from the beginning, because it's nowadays such an important part of our architecture and what we are building and how we are managing the energy consumption, not just of the house, but also of the way a house is built and created, where the materials are coming from, etc., etc. So nowadays, actually, we are able to build houses that can produce even more energy than they need. And that is something, well, this will be the key to our future. Maybe we will be able to do that in a huge amount of buildings, or we will not have any future at all. And then the other thing that is also so strongly connected to the way of thinking architecture as a holistic architecture, it's not, it's so important what kind of materials that you are also using. Because it's not about always the calculations about heat amount or whatever, and it's not a matter of material, because in most of the things that we are constructing, the construction itself takes more energy than the whole building then is consuming for years. So if we as architects make the wrong decisions at the beginning, it's something that the user of the building is never able to get back on. And that you have to have always in your mind. We have to do the right decisions. It's not anybody else. It's not a client who does it for the first time that has to come up with the right ideas. It's us that have to do that. So, and that's how we came up then with this diagram that was produced when we did this Sunlight House project some years ago. And it was only an idea of how can we show an holistic idea of architecture in one diagram. So they put the most important topics here, and it's as easy as that. The bigger the white area is, the more holistic the project is working. But then after that, I found out that it's not about these 3 or 10 topics, but if we are dealing with architecture, it's so much more topics that we have to bring together. It's always a really big number of things that we have to consider. And the more of these things we consider, the more holistic is the idea of architecture a project is able to show up with. So, and all these together then, that's what I would call Baukultur. And for that understanding, I think it's so important that not only we as architects are able to fulfill this, but actually we need a lot of other people to make it possible to realize that. So we need the right clients to understand what we are really doing. We need also the right craftsmen or companies who are able to realize what we thought about. We also need the right laws and norms that give us the opportunities to think in the right directions, etc., etc. So actually there we are back at the point where it's not a thing about architects, but it's actually an idea of a whole society that should work in the right direction or not. Everybody working in another direction is making the effect smaller and smaller. Well, and that's what we try to do in our office. As I said, I have a very small office. We are 7 people in the moment. We are working on projects in different scale, mostly in the German-speaking region of Europe. So that means all Austria, a little bit of Switzerland, South Germany, North Italy. And today I want to show you 4 examples that are very different projects, different scale, different programs, to make it a bit understandable the way we are thinking in our office. The first one is a project. It's not our project. No. It's already existing, but has anybody an idea where this building could be?
Switzerland.
Oh, very good. Mm-hmm. It's in the middle of Switzerland. It's about 1 hour westward from Zurich. And I found it when I drove to the construction site, and I really liked this way it was constructed and thought. This building it has a very beautiful details. Well, and we were invited to, hello. invited to do a house there in this part of a village on a slope that is quite steep. It was very difficult even to climb up here because it is so, this is to the south side and here it goes up already about 6 meters or something. So I thought it's quite difficult to act in this surrounding. What we try to do is that we minimize the footprint of the building in a way that we make a really compact square building in this settlement here. And what we try to do is to minimize the change of landscape that we had to do on this plot. Because what you can see all around here, this is a typical way of dealing with slopes usually. So they built up these huge stone walls to shift straight areas. They are doing these steep, even steeper hills to make a straight garden, or with the garage, with the way of dealing with the garden, whatever. And our idea was to set the house very simply on this plot with as little as possible change of outside to keep the grass and slope area as it was. But therefore, yeah, the clients of course wanted to have a garage, or it was even given by the law that we had to do one, and they wanted to get up with a staircase from the garage to the building. So what we did was that we connected the two parts underground and filled up the slope in a way that it was before again. So what you can see is only this small part of the garage here, and then a building that is set quite free on this plot. And that is completely covered with shingles. And it's only this very small terrace that gives space exactly for what is needed to sit outside and have a table there, a little barbecue. And there is a second exit from the house. You can get out from the staircase. All the things that are set in the slope are made in concrete, and everything that is set on is again made in wood. And the wooden construction is very precisely set on these lines of concrete. All these parts are made of spruce, which is quite common there, and only the top part, the rooftop, is made of red cedar because it lasts even longer than the spruce then. Here you can see the upper part, the wooden construction. Also inside we used all the spruce in an all-natural way. So we didn't treat the surface nor outside or inside. And the upper part is very precisely only opened by very small windows. So it's a more cozy and private atmosphere that you have up there. And we were trying to work with the light from above. We have these skylights up here. And the idea to not get too much hot energy in summertime in there was that both of the rooms are orientated in the same direction toward east. So to get in all the best light that you can get for these rooms. And both parts of these skylights are connected in a way that the space then interacts between each other. So it's like fingers grabbing in between each other, reaching for the light then from both the same side which then looks like this. So you can imagine here in between there is this other skylight from the other room that is giving light over here. Yeah, this is how the upper part then looks like. And if we are going down, it's getting more this concrete part of the building, as it was necessary to set it in the topography. All these parts then are very precisely also set into the slope so that you precisely have the surface on the top of the kitchen, for example. So if you're standing here, you can look all the way up the slope, and it's a really nice view there. A view from the terrace inside. And that is the way the staircase is going up, so that you always have these views. Every time you are turning around the stair, you have a view along a different direction towards the surrounding. And well, as we had to use some concrete for the lower parts, we tried to make them also in a very special atmosphere. So what we did was that we were using plywood as a negative form for the concrete. And all the surface of the concrete in the whole building was produced with this. So you could even see now the branches and the structure of all the wooden panels. And well, actually the craftsmen in Switzerland, they constructed very well. You can see it's all done very precisely on the millimeter. But the concrete structure took more than 1 year to be finished. And then the wooden structure came and was lifted up in just 2 days. So this is also a bit the difference between ways of constructing. What was also very important in this project was this, because the client was an Italian guy, and the first thing he said was that he needs a pizza oven right in the middle of the building. So actually we constructed all the building around a pizza oven. And it's in the middle, so this is the one side. You can open this door and with all the ingredients to make pizza there, the olive oil and all the things. And from the other side, you can heat it like this. It was not very easy because I didn't mention so far that the energy concept was a total passive house concept. And in Switzerland, it's even more difficult to do that. They have this Minergie P standard that we have to fulfill. So actually, this was the first worldwide passive house certificated pizza oven. And you can imagine it was quite difficult to make it. Well, another project, another scale, another surrounding. This is Vienna, Platz. I guess you all know it maybe. It was a competition that took place about 2 years ago. And well, as we are located in Vienna, and it's not very often that it's open competitions for these huge kind of programs. And actually it was maybe the biggest cultural open project in the beginning of our century. So we decided to participate in this competition and to enter also a suggestion. Well, the site is very special. You can here see the Karlskirche that gives the Karlsplatz the name. Yeah, I show it like this. And here there is the existing Wien Museum, as you can read here, that was built in the 50s and then continued with another block of building that is an insurance office building. And the program was to define a new extension for the museum. which was about double size, and it was open to set it wherever you thought it should be, up to here about. So all this area here was completely open. And that is also something that doesn't happen very often, because nowadays the regulations for competitions are getting tighter and tighter. So once you get a competition that is open like that, you should grab the chance and participate, I guess. Well, and it was this building, and it was also open how to deal with this existing building. Of course, it was one of important parts of Austrian architecture after the war. But actually, when we stepped into this building at the hearing of the competition, it was not only, I knew it from before, the exhibition spaces, but actually the basement down there was already so destroyed. There were walls with this big open parts in, and because it's all set in the sand of the Wien River. So it was very badly constructed in the 50s, and the question was really what to do with the building, to take it, to go on with it, to completely remodel it, whatever. But for me, the most important thing was that this actually is not a museum building. And this is such a very important thing if you think about sustainability and what are structures able to fulfill in their lifetime. So this is, I think, one of the most important things that you have to think about. Is this really a museum? Because you can see, for example, all the windows are closed. Just because most of the exhibitions shouldn't get any daylight. But you can see all these rooms here are completely open to daylight. So it was a question overall, okay, what kind of functions should take place in the existing building, I guess. And then, of course, it was a matter of urban planning, because it's actually one of the most important sites in Vienna that was planned over and over. There were so many competitions already held. So this is one of the examples, for example, that Otto Wagner suggested for this place about 100 years ago. So you see this as a new part that he suggested then, looking like this at that time. And it was so close to realize it that the empire, he wanted to see it to make the right suggestion or the right decision if it's good to build it or not. So they even realized one facade in reality. They completely built it up just for the empire to have a look at and to see, yes, okay, you can go, or no, I don't like it. But it's not only this example, but for example, the last days I was on the Biennale in Venedig, and I just saw this picture as one of the exhibition panels. This was also one of the projects that were developed for this place. So, some examples of 1908, with all the different ways of how to deal with this situation. Some other examples of 1908, some examples of 1946, after the war, some others from 53, and so on. So there were hundreds of architects that were already thinking about this place. And now there should be some other 100 offices thinking about it as well. And how do we do this? It's this place here. You can see it. This was the axis of the Karlskirche that was actually at the beginning set on this street here, which was one of the first streets the Romans did. But then here, for example, there was the new opera building built. So from that point on, this axis was closed. Then there was still a relation between these two, but then they closed the ring at the end of the 19th century. So, well, from that point on, the church didn't have a place to look at. And all the other things, I mean, I could talk about, for a few hours only about this urban planning situation, but what we came up with as an idea was, okay, with the classical way of doing urban planning, we can't solve all these problems that we have right now there. Because there were so many architects that tried it already, but they always tried it in a very conventional way, always working with blocks. And as soon as you work with blocks, you have a very strict repertoire of language that you have. And that's why our idea was to come up with a different language that is more connected to landscape and able to provide completely different qualities for a project as well, because it's so much also related to the Platz and to what is happening there as an urban open field. So there was a very long discussion about which kind of parameters we would use. We would bring together how could we form this volume in a way that it is able to provide all these situations that now were missing. And all together was then built in models, etc. And also, of course, in sketches, always trying to see if we get a maximum of parameters together in this project to work things out. This is also one thing that I am always very strong connected to, this way of sketching and bringing thoughts into a physical description. I have behind my work desk this shelf that is 2 meters long, made in oak. And I bought the first book when I started in the Academy of Fine Arts, because we had to do a diary about our first week in Vienna. So I filled it up in 1 week, and I so much liked this idea of having your thoughts physically conservated and saved in this kind of book, that I kept on going. And suddenly, when I came to the bookshop, they said, okay, they don't sell these kind of books anymore. So I was quite disappointed. But then I found out, so that was in 1999 or something. And it was not very easy at that time to find it in internet, because most of the companies didn't have a homepage or something. But I discovered the company who did it, and then I went there and I said, okay, how much is it to make some new books? And they said, well, it depends on how many you want. And then I thought about it and I said, okay, I want exactly so many that I have 100 in total. So this is the 100. And then I did this shelf, and this here is the indicator where I am right now. So I'm working now on number 45. And the target is to fill up all this. And once I'm done, I retire. And I was already asked, because 2 years ago I exhibited this shelf in the Biennale in Venice. And then I was asked, okay, but what is happening if you die before? And I said, well, okay, then the indicator sets just how far I got, and the rest is just empty. It's just like that. And another one, of course, said, okay, but what is if you finish and you're not done with your work? And I said, well, then I retire anyway and I write a book about it. So, well, and this is how we are working. So Another part that we're trying to do on this big project, that we're making such kind of mood boards, where we are bringing ideas together to discuss it, to concentrate it, to sort things out, to get it more and more to an overall project. And of course, all the models that we are doing. So for every project, we are doing 4, 5, 6, 10 models, which is always a very important part for us, for the development, but also, for example, for the clients to understand it. Because it quite often happens that I explain some drawings, and after 1 hour, people say, yes, but where is the entrance? Then you know, okay, they didn't get it. But with the model, it's quite easy, mostly. And, well, here you can just see some of them, some ideas. And this is what we came up then with. This volume integrated all the aspects that we thought that the project should fulfill. Well, but this is then the very tricky part, because to define a volume that is able to fulfill the urban needs for a thing, but then also to come up with all the program and to be able to fill it in and to make it dance with closed hands. That was really something that was one of the most difficult parts on this program. So you can see here how the building worked. Actually, it's it's a simple block, but so cut it that it gets 2 pyramids that are just brought together in 1 point. So at 1 point at the building, you have actually a wall thickness of 0 millimeters. Well, but we didn't go that far to show that in a competition. All aspects brought together then again on a very simple drawing for the competition. So you could see all the things relating to here, but still opening to the existing building, to turn around, to take these references from the other side. Also, this building was part of the competition, so to change that as well in a way to create this more or less 3 different spaces: the Karlsplatz itself, then the part in front of the church as with the fountain, and then this small square for the museum itself. With all the different layers, the connection completely underground with the biggest spaces for exhibition. Then the entrance level where we could completely differentiate between the existing building here, which we gave the functions, all the functions of infrastructure, so say all the offices, all the craftsman rooms, all the storages, etc. All the things that are logic to be placed in a building like that with all the windows. And then on the other side, the new exhibition space that is more or less completely closed, with only very small openings to very certain positions in the urban surrounding. Yeah, and as you see, of course, every level was completely different then. And also the sections. Every part of the section completely different. Sometimes we were ourselves quite surprised how the sections looked like. Well, and this was one of the renderings we did for the competition. How the inside could look like, a very dynamic space. But more important also the outside, the surface of the building. So we suggested this huge staircase just to give this part of the Karlsplatz some additional qualities that it is missing right now. Because it's very close to the university. and we wanted to offer some outdoor space that could be used in a completely different way as it is right now. And some other thing, of course, if you are working on a spot that is so connected to history, we also wanted to connect our building in a way that it is, say, drowned in this history as well. So we took all the maps that we could find, sorted them out, starting from the period of the Romans up to nowadays, and brought it as layers over each other. And then folded out our surface of the building and cutted them in like these plans that you have to tailor clothes, for example. So every line has some different meaning and is representing a different period of time. And then we thought, okay, we would like to show them in a way that is also typical for Vienna. And we did all these pictures of the surfaces of the existing buildings of Vienna, all the way that the material is treated in different ways. Yeah, I could talk about this, but it's not so important. But it was just an idea to show all these parts of history also on the surface. And then we also, of course, did all the energy concepts, the construction parts, etc. Well, and ended up with this project then that was at the end, we finished in 4th place. What won was this one here. So I guess a completely different idea. So they kept all the museum in this part and then set one block on it. Well, it's still under discussion if it's realized or not, but we will see, I guess, in the next year. What I wanted to show you with this as well was that it was such a huge amount of energy that was spent on this kind of competition. I think you as architectural students should also understand what it means also for a society, but also for an office, to participate in one of those competitions. It was in total 274 projects from 26 countries all over the world. And I calculated about how many hours it were. So it was about 180,000 hours that were spent only on the competition, which means it's about 90 years of work that was also presented then at this exhibition. Or in euros, it's about more than 12 million euros that small or bigger companies, offices spent for this. And the total amount that was given for the purse of this competition was that. So it's only about 1% of how much worth the whole work was. So that is also something we have to think about if we are architects. What is the worth of our work, and what is the value that the society gives us back for what we are doing? Well, the third project, completely other scale again, and completely other location and program. It is in Burgenland, which is just close to Hungary, about 1 hour drive from here. It is this plot here. People came up with this really beautiful garden, and the idea to have a weekend house there, a weekend house and a liquid brewery. And we found these very beautiful structures, existing structures there, that is actually very rare in this region because most of the existing structures are already completely destroyed. It's like everywhere, people changed their mind, changed their way of building. And what we said, okay, we would like to make something that behaves like these three buildings that were already there. That is more calm in a way, set between each other, and trying to grab the qualities that are already existing and maybe add some new, but in a very silent way. Because what is happening around is just like that. Well, this is just very typical houses that you can see our ones here, and still things are like that are built nowadays. And you really ask yourself, where is the connection to what was done a few decades ago? So we came up with a very simple concept of building these three walls here in bricks, because it's the very traditional way of building there. And then to set all the rest of the building as a wooden structure in between these existing brick walls, which then looked like that after we finished it mostly. It was last spring. Also using the same materials, the same details, the same kind of rooftop. This is the existing structure, for example. Here we set in the liquid room. Liquor, sorry. Well, and this is how it is constructed. You can see these walls that we also had to do because it's standing at the border to the neighbor, so it's fire protected. And then we built all the structure, the wooden structure, with the CLT panels. So this is the office looking if all the work is done properly. And everything was so prefabricated that all the surfaces were already finished after the house was set together, all in one day. But we also tried to use all the other materials in a very simple and natural way. So this is the plaster that we used outside, not given any color in, only used clay and kalk and sand, the local sand, giving it a really beautiful color. And also inside we used a very fine plaster that is only made by kalk and the earth that we could find there. And even on the floor, we were using this part of clay and casein. It's a very old traditional way of doing floors. It's only 1 millimeter of cover, but it's very strong and holds the surface in a very good condition to haptical reasons. Well, and as it was finished, the house then was set in between the others, still looking quite fresh, but you will already be able to see how it will look in about 5 or 10 years. You will not even recognize that it's one of the new buildings, maybe. As it is a building that is only partly used, we covered all the openings also with these sliding elements. So if the people are not there, they close it. And the structure has the same language as the neighbor buildings. But then you can open it and the whole building changes completely. and gives so much space, open space and light for the interior. It's really nice there to sit. We also created space outside to sit, but as it's so open, the people are mostly sitting inside now to have lunch or whatever, because it's nearly like sitting outside. With the integrated kitchen, and here you can see this ground floor that is only in the middle with this staircase and one toilet underneath the staircase. All the rest is a completely open space. And on the top, it's also this open space for a working desk that is located behind the stair here. And this is how the sleeping rooms look like. Well, and yeah, as you can see here, it has a different proportion, because I think this is something that shows that it's not the same building at all, but it's speaking with the same language. And I think that makes a very natural relationship between all these projects. Well, and this is the last one, another completely different topic, project that we just realized 2 weeks ago. We were invited to make an installation for a festival, a small festival in Vorarlberg, which always has very nice events, very unconventional events, and is always located in different places. They were already in empty supermarkets, or in a gymnastic hall, or in, well, all the different things. And I was asked 1 year ago if we want to make the next pop-up stage. I said yes, but I didn't know where it will take place. So when I came there first, they showed me this chapel. Actually, it's a chapel, but it looks like a church. It's quite huge. And we were asked to do a concept how to deal with this space then. What was given was the program that they need a stage of about 60 square meters for dances, for music, for jazz orchestra. They need also about 200 people to sit. And they want to do a small exhibition, and after every event there should be some place where you can have a drink and have a bar or something like that. All together in this space, and all together, as you can imagine, for not very much money. Yeah, so we had to come up with an idea of how can we create a space in this very strongly defined church space, with all these parts that in our culture so strongly connect to religion and to the way it is used as a church. And how can you make something in this space that is maybe turning around the way of seeing a space like that? But then also with very practical questions, what to do with all the benches, where you put it at. Do people have to sit on the benches then? Because then you again feel like a prayer, because it's of course always then that they are so uncomfortable to sit at, because of a lot of reasons. Well, and the idea then was to exactly work with these benches. To use it as construction. Again, the first sketches then. The idea was to use this very strong structure of benches, of wooden benches, as a basic structure for the stage. And to just lift them up, set them over each other, and precisely bring them into a form where it is possible to fulfill all the needs that the all the events gives. So we measured the benches completely by centimeter, then constructed them in virtual space, and then started to put them together, lift them, flip them, whatever, in a way that altogether made sense. And worked in this huge space to create a completely different space. Changing the direction, I thought that was also quite important, to not always look at where the orgel and the altar were set always, but changing the direction and also changing the perspective of how you would see the single elements. And then the nice thing also was that we had also to construct it ourselves. So that is also something that is very nice as an architectural team, that you're not only working on simple small models, but suddenly you have to work on scale 1-to-1. And that was also quite like a team building seminar. So very good exercise. And we went there and we had 4 days that we calculated to construct it. Prefabricated secondary structure for the stage that is set on, then bringing all the things together. And this is how it worked in a small movie. Noon break. And the nice thing was really that we managed to make it all in 1 day, although we thought we had 4 days of work in front of us. So the other 3 days we went on vacation in Vorarlberg and saw some other nice projects as well. And what also was very nice that all the things worked so perfectly together. Even all the infrastructure like the lighting and the microphones and everything could be covered so perfectly in this structure that, yeah, all these things worked out even better as we saw it. This was then at the end before the first event. This was a part of the exhibition then that we also fabricated from the benches. And this was the small bar that we also created from the benches. And the funny thing was really when people came there, and there were also a lot of architects, they said, well, they were always thinking about what was the idea of the bar because they never saw such a sculpture. And only after the whole event, they realized that it was all benches that they saw. So we were really able to change their perspective, I guess. So that was then the opening ceremony with the organizers. And then the events itself, they were really beautiful events because suddenly with turning off the light and just having this presentation panel at the back, it created really a completely different space as it was before. And there were some jazz musicians from New York, and they had to interpret, they were pictures from photographers from Vorarlberg, and every photographer had to do a series of 40 pictures that would tell a story. And they were playing the film music to the pictures then. And it worked so well that you could really believe that you are in a movie and your brain told the story in between the pictures, following the music. So that was really very nice. Then the second day, also a very nice format. It was the idea of a Familienaufstellung. I don't know if you know that, so family placement. It's about the idea of setting people in relation to each other and giving them positions. Normally it's used for families to create different views on the existing relations between family members. And here it was the idea to use it on the topics of Vorarlberg as a region. So everybody got positions like, for example, the government, or small councils, or tourists, or farmers, or whatever. And with all different topics, they tried to set these positions and analyze what is the problem, how could we solve it, and how could we get on with seeing it in different perspectives as well. All together with the music then. So also this was a way of looking at something existing in another way. And then at the end there was a cartoonist that also made a really nice performance on his desk with the camera showing all the pictures that he were drawing live at the panel at the back. So that was it. Thank you.
Presentation, especially the last example, brought me to the idea to arrange this room finally and to be free of these very uncomfortable benches and to do perhaps something different of them.
It would be a nice idea.
You should do a workshop with our students too.
Yeah, maybe we just take a screwdriver and start to reorganize it.
They have not been protected? The benches or the space or?
Well, it is, yes. It was everything under protection. That was why we were using only this way of connecting things. So we were only connecting it with this good, so that everything could be separated completely again. This was also one given task that we had. And here also the nice thing was, because we didn't separate the things by ourselves, because we left earlier to Vienna again. But then on Monday I got a phone call that they got everything back in just about 5 hours. So also a very sustainable way of using elements, because everything could be used in the way it was before again. So also the other elements were just giving back to the carpenters and they could use it again.
That meant very few hours and very few euros.
Yes, yes. So we could.
You usually use this kind of calculations.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so now it's space for your questions. So if there are something, please. I already warned Juri that it will be a kind of silence at the beginning, but perhaps we can somehow overcome it.
Well, it's really open.
Okay, so
I'm
I
not.
start with my stupid questions.
Yes, yes. Okay.
The first, I would like to touch the competition on the Museum Wien, because this is really a kind of exciting topic. And my question is perhaps not that stupid, but somehow undermining what you have introduced as a concept. Because you said that you always in your work you try to be silent, and this is not really a silent proposal. Okay, so I understand it. Perhaps this was because of the place, because this is really something extraordinary, so perhaps you should be more loud. But then I would have a question. Why to be so loud when you are surrounded by such a important and very, very loud buildings already? That how it is possible that you, with your background, which is quite, I don't know, modest, or how to put it, and then you decided for such a strong position?
Well, I was asked these questions already before.
Oh, sorry.
No,
I said
from colleagues. No. I think it's very good question. Because after the competition and after the exhibition of the competition, other people that knew me or knew my work asked the same question. Yes, but for me it was. The answer is that it's always very much related to the surrounding and to the context and to the program as well. And it's actually, if you say it's a loud project, maybe it is written like that, yes. But for me, I didn't see it so much as a loud project, but as a project that should be able to be strong enough to stand in the row of other strong buildings that are surrounded. And therefore, maybe it's also about this connection of the family setting. If you want to be part of this family, you should also have some characteristics that other buildings also had at their time. But to understand these qualities in our time, I think it should show in a different way. We already discussed that at the very beginning of the competition. Okay, what can we do there that makes sense in a way that it's related to other buildings, but still strong enough to stand on its own? And well, this form was just a result of all the research. So at the beginning, we didn't expect it to come out like this, honestly. But for example, there were some projects that were only setting a very simple block there. And I tried to understand this answer when I looked at the exhibition then, and I really felt for such a complex situation that it was there, it was just not the right answer. You could just not understand it in the way that I am understanding urban planning. So that is why it
But I like very much the argumentation with the new family member who should have the same strong voice to communicate with the others.
For me, it's often these kind of relations that I see also buildings in. And that is also the very big difficulty if you have to set a building in a surrounding where you actually don't want to be a member of the family. So this,
but now you are a member of the family of the architects who tried and never succeeded.
Right, so. Right. That's as well, yes.
Member of the Wagner family.
Well, he also never built it, yes.
Exactly. He was quite traumatized because of that. I hope you are not.
Well. Of course, it's always quite a big loss of energy if you put it in there.
You did it quite precisely. What a kind of loss of energy it was.
Yes. And the interesting thing about the project that was realized in the 50s was that it actually didn't win the competition either. It only was the first place as well.
Okay.
So the fourth place as well. So there's still hope.
There is still the chance.
No, it should be the first one that is built. No. It's.
Okay, so now it's really your turn.
Come on. Yes, please.
Do only passive houses, or?
No. Not at all. Actually, I'm always very skeptic about passive houses. It is something that was pushed very strongly of our government the last years. And it is a concept that is more or less very easy to understand even for politicians. So that's why I think it is working in the moment quite well. Everybody thinks he understands what is a passive house. But that is the problem, what we did with this idea, that everything concentrated so much on the heat amount. And actually, a holistic building, I think, is so much more than only focusing on this aspect. So I would rather go and say I would much more like to make buildings that are using regrowing resources and dealing with aspects of really low amount of gray energy than to minimize the last few percent to reach a passive house status. I'm sure that it will be in the next decades more and more going to these directions. That the only problem is that it's much more complex, and therefore it's much more difficult to make it somebody understandable. What are all the triggers that you have to equalize to make it possible? But that is exactly what I meant at the beginning. At the beginning, I said we just lost our natural instinct of understanding what holistic architecture or a holistic way of building is. We all knew it 100 years ago because there was no other way to do it. We had to deal with the materials that we had. We had to deal with the aspects of small resources that we had. It's just our time now that we are living in that suddenly gives us the idea everything is available everywhere. But it's not. You can, of course, buy everything in internet everywhere, and some things come from China even more cheap than if it's produced here. But it will be not the way that we survive the next 100 years. That's for sure. So that's why we, or especially you, have to think about this idea now. Because that's what you are doing the next 50, 60 years. I don't want to be impolite, but it will be like that, really. And therefore, you now have to think about what you're doing. And that's what we said at the beginning, because I was asking what kind of programs you're doing and what you are dealing with. And if I look back on my time as a student, I found it so important to use this time as a student to think about things that don't have to be efficient in a way of dealing with your time. But you are really in the position that you can spend your time more or less in the way you can afford it. You have a lot of time now, and you really should spend it on thinking different concepts, seeing different things, hearing different things, discussing them, because once you're in the process of production, it's quite hard, I can tell you. So you should take everything you get now. Later it will be 10 times more difficult, really.
I will get a question.
Yes, please.
Your experience with the carpentry you had after school, do you think it helped you somehow to understand the other things of architecture?
Well, I think so, yes. For me, it was very helpful, at least. And that's what I'm always telling my students as well. I think it's so helpful to at least once work on the other side, work on the construction side, see the things that the people there need and how they work and how they see what they are doing, to understand what the meaning is of what they are doing and how they see what we are doing. This was such a perfect example because usually we don't build our buildings ourselves. This was just a small project, and I had one guy in the office, Valentin, who's really good in skills. He also worked as a carpenter for a few months. And he planned everything very precisely, really thought about every detail and bought everything. And, but then we were on the construction site, and I told him, okay, you have to take everything that we need there. All the drawings, all the tools, everything. And then we entered the room, and of course the first question was, okay, where to start? Give us a measure, where shall we place it? And everybody was looking at the drawings, and there was not a single measure who could give us an idea of where to start. And I said, okay, you understand what it is about? You always have to think it from the other side so that the drawings really make sense. And it's not just about showing the measures, but it's also about thinking what element comes next. And therefore, I would really tell everybody it's so helpful to at least a few weeks or some months to work and practice what is done outside there.
But perhaps now you have touched the core of the problem of losing or of the loss of Baukultur, of the culture of building, that the architects he couldn't find a proper partner on the site, that you actually do not have the craftsmen there to respond to your questions or to your problems.
Yes.
That of course occur during the drawing process. And
yes, that's true. That's also, for example, something that I so much like on working still in Vorarlberg. Because of that, really. That's always the example that I'm telling. If I come up with a project and I sit together with a carpenter in Vorarlberg on a table and I show him, it's always like, wow, we didn't do that so far. I like to do it. I don't know how it works, but I will find something that makes it work. If I sit together in other regions in Austria with some companies, the first thing is always, well, we never did it. I don't know if it works. I'm just not sure if we can make that happen. So it's always completely the other direction of view that they have. And I really think that this is such a very special atmosphere where you can create very positive development. But on the other side, it's also very often that I'm holding lectures where there are a lot of people from companies and they are saying the others, or tell me the other side, that they say, well, we would so much like to do such projects, but we are never asked by the architects to do something like that. So I think it's really a problem of this language that you speak together. And therefore, you just need this overlapping between the one side and the other side. It's like everywhere. As soon as you find the right language to speak to each other, everything is so much easier. But if you always think like, yeah, he's doing something different and that I don't want to do and I don't want to talk about, then yeah, it creates an atmosphere where it's quite difficult to develop, I think. But it's also very positive examples. It's, yeah, sorry if you... You can really ask every question. You know, it's really that no question is too stupid or too whatever. I can answer you very well. As soon as I know it, I have one. Yes.
What is the durability of shingles covering?
Sorry?
The shingle
durability. Well, it depends on mostly two factors. It's the angle of the roof and the material.
I mean on the wall.
On the wall?
Yeah.
On the wall, it really lasts like, it depends again on the direction, if it's the weather direction or not. But if it's the weather side, it's about 40 to 50 years. If it's the other side, it's more than 100 years that it's lasting. Yes, it's only about 6 to 8 millimeters, and that's why you can only use very specific trees because it's not sawed, but it's splitted. Yes. So, and that's why it's only common in some regions where exactly these kind of trees are growing that you can use for that.
We have the tradition here in Slovakia.
Yeah, I for example, saw the project in the Tatra. I was there with Samuel some years ago, and he showed us all these small villages with the shingles that are connected with this gap. Completely different way of using it, but also very nice. Yes.
But I will continue with your kind of questions now. About the floor you mentioned in this wonderful Burgenland project. You said that it's a kind of glue, or what is it? Very thick.
It's
traditional.
Yeah, it's a mix that they are using. It's using clay. It's using the yellow part of egg. It's using casein, which is actually all ingredients that the painters in the Renaissance were using for their paintings. And it makes the surface, once it's dry, completely resistant, although it's so thin. And it was used for hundreds of years, but then it just was not chic anymore. So it was, the poor people's floor then. So nobody used it anymore. And there's a small company, only 3 people in Vorarlberg again, that one guy, and I was there 2 weeks ago, and he showed me around, and it's incredible what they are doing. They are mixing hundreds of different ingredients to form these plasters and floors and ceilings. I guess Dietmar Eberle was here as well, yes, and he for sure showed his office building.
Yes,
huh?
but he was not speaking about these details.
Okay, because
not mentioning the mixture.
Okay,
not talking about the eggs, absolutely.
No, no eggs. How comes? Well, this was exactly this company that made this plaster of his office building.
It's a kind of stupa lustra or something?
Something like that, yes. This guy can also talk for hours about this way he's experimenting these materials, and it's really wonderful to see it. And it's so different if you touch this wall and if you see it. You can just understand the difference between these Silikonharzputze or whatever, what you get now from industry. It's just not the same thing. It's, yeah.
Thank you. Yes, 2 more questions. Great.
I was wondering, like, what is the cost of this kind of building, which you are using with this kind of materials, in
Comparing with the standard.
with like an ordinary houses which are built handmade, and how the customers are reacting to this. You propose that you want to use this material.
Well, the second question, how the customers are reacting. Actually, I'm quite happy that most of the customers that are coming to my office exactly want these kind of materials. It's really people that have themselves, they're feeling that they are missing something in, say, modern architecture, or not modern architecture, but say modern materials in the way that it's used. These are people that still have the sensibility of seeing this difference between a plastered wall and a covered wall with, I don't know, plastic, whatever, or between a wood that is only 4 millimeters or 20 millimeters or even 40. And I think in the moment we are really in a time where, and we are at the costs, that it is something that is still brought in as some luxury, but actually it's not. Actually, it's more simple, and it would be easier to do if there would be just a bigger amount of production for it. In the moment, it's very small companies that can only provide these materials, some of them. I mean, wood is available in another way, but for example, this covered. And therefore, they had to come here because there are no companies who know how to do it. And they had to spend 4 days here, and there were the costs of the hotel, whatever. Therefore, it was more expensive to do the floor. Otherwise, the floor itself and the material, it is very cheap, actually. It is not more expensive. It is just, what is expensive in the moment is the knowledge. To know how to do it and to have the people to know how to do it. Otherwise, you could do it even yourself. It is.
And it costs also the time, because of course it's very easy to do it with industrially produced prefabricated elements, common, reused.
Yes, nowadays it's right. Nowadays it's so much easier to order it in internet, and somebody will bring it 3 days later, and it's in front of your construction site. Than to think about, okay, what is on my construction site? Maybe there is already some clay that I could use or whatever. So we lost completely this thinking because everything is so available. That is maybe the. But yeah, I see that it's more and more people that that ask themselves these questions. What should be the surrounding of where I'm living the next or the rest of my life or whatever? Does it make sense to use some things that I'm not connected with, that I don't feel connected with? Or does it make more sense if the wood that I had to cut to make a house maybe finds itself again in the desk of my living room or whatever, or things like that. So, of course, these are all thoughts that just work in small scale. But I think, like everything, it should start at these small examples. And in a big amount of small projects, again, it makes a difference in thinking. And then it also works in bigger projects as well. That's
okay. There was another question.
I was talking this floor, thin layer, is hard enough to walk with shoes. Yes. It's really like they were already using it in schools even, and yeah. So you can imagine they use it in a very rough way there too. So, but it works there as well. Yes. It's a very usual Estrich concrete layer, yes, with the heating there. In this case.
Back to the academics. It was quite interesting your competition proposal for the neighborhood of Rakúskeho. It's, for me, very, very spectacular cars. Very, very spectacular, very strong appearance. So it's quite hard how to be part in the vicinity of this spectacular church. So there are, I think, just two ways. One was the Wagner big volume, and the second one to be spectacular, also to be spectacular. So this relation of those two, the historical spectacularity and your, that's something for me very interesting. This juxtaposition of two similar methods but very different ages. It's quite interesting.
for me it was really a question, you know, when I was reading the brief for the competition, it was really written that it should be a museum that is showing all the history of Vienna. It should be something that is an attraction for people to come there, not only for the Viennese people, because nowadays it's mostly just Viennese people that go there, because other people, tourists, yeah, in the Wien Museum, yeah, because normally people don't find it even as a museum, because it so much looks like an office building.
But they have some nice exhibitions.
They have really nice exhibitions, if you know about the exhibitions, but you would never enter it just because you pass by. And that was all asked, and I thought, okay, but how do you react in history in a city like Vienna, where there are so many strong architects and architectural objects with such a high quality. And every building with this quality gives a reference to its time. And that's what creates Vienna as a whole. And that's why people are coming here. And that's my big criticism on the Winning project. I know these architects, and I really appreciate their work, and they did a really good job, everything. But I just wonder if a city like Vienna, once in 100 years, spends 100 million of euros, or maybe then at the end even more, to create a museum at such a place. If the right answer is an attic on an existing middle-class quality building. Can it be that this is where we are standing right now? And I think that's exactly the problem of Vienna, that they had so many periods of time where they could be really proud on what they were doing. It was not just the Gothic and Baroque and Gründerzeit and Loos and also Karl Marxhof and whatever. These were really outstanding projects worldwide, you know. And now we are living in a time where all the politicians are afraid of showing something where somebody could say, but this costed our money. Therefore, they really prefer to spend it in a way where it's using the same amount of money, but looking like you didn't use it. And that's just stupid, I think, because all the things that they are now so proud on, they are always showing on, yes, that's what we are, but now what they are doing is just only something that you have to, be sorry for it. And I felt that this is just not the right answer for a topic like that. There was actually there was a third idea of dealing with it, that was keeping everything underground and everything as it was. Well, this is maybe also a very typical way of dealing with something nowadays. So if you don't make anything visible, then you don't make any mistake.
Yeah.
But
But actually also
or a big one.
Or a big one, yes.
Also the position of the politicians is quite understandable after all these grand projects that took place in Europe in a few years ago, like mentioning the Philharmonia in Hamburg or several others. So it's good when they are afraid.
Yes and no, but at the end, it will be our time will be judged by the things that we leave in history, and that's maybe the connection between the two things. It's the idea of sustainability always means, I think, at least two different meanings. The one thing is that you deal with the materials and all the resources in a very respectful way. Okay, that's the one thing. But the other aspect is, and it is only connected to each other, that you make something out of it that really lasts for as long as possible, because otherwise the calculation is then wrong again. And and therefore we really have to think, okay, what can last for such a long time that it's still strong enough to be used in the future and not has to be turned down again in 20 years or something. Because that would be the very wrong answer on any question, I think. For example, when I was this weekend in Venice, you walk through the Arsenal and you really think like, wow, this is such a power. You know, there were people, they only had to create some rooftop to make ships. Okay. But now there are standing buildings 500 years later that can be used in so many different ways and have such a quality in it. I mean, this is really something given. And there, for sure, there would also be a lot of people then who said, okay, but why do we need a 300-meter hall to be built? Yes, but you know, it was a completely different scale then, and a completely different way of thinking. But now we can understand why, because it made so much sense for that, and yeah, that's what we should try to do.
Some more questions from your side. Yes, there is another academic question.
I would compare this kind of competition in Vienna to the problem. For sure, you know the old city town hall in Prague.
Mm-hmm.
For this topic, it was tens of competition projects or studies prepared during the decades,
mm-hmm.
and nothing was built until this moment. So maybe this is a kind of topic making a stage for presenting some level of thinking of each epoch. And, maybe it's not bad that for this moment it was nothing
built. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's even better.
Yeah, that's true. Yes, sometimes for an office it might be a pity, but for society it must be, maybe it's just better that nothing is built. It's true. Yes. Maybe it's yeah, you're right. Maybe it's just a long way of discussion, and it just makes sense when the discussion really comes to a point where it really makes sense for all of it. Yeah, and then yeah, you're right. Mm-hmm. Any other questions?
The other questions? Yes, please.
I just wanted to ask you about your question about where we are nowadays,
Mm-hmm.
and how to build ecologically and how to come back to the nature in this time when, for example, buildings materials and ways of constructing buildings are really expensive for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. Well, the building costs, it's really a problem nowadays. I don't know how it is here, but in Austria in the moment it's such a boom of building. It's for us it's really hard to find companies in the moment to even give us some prices for what we would like to build. If you ask a carpenter now to build a house in Vorarlberg, for example, they say, well, till the beginning of 2020, no chance, you have to wait. And therefore, in this atmosphere, of course, the prices are increasing. It's really like the last 2 or 3 years, it got even by about 20 to 25% more expensive, which is really enormous. But I'm also sure that this will go down again, as soon as our economy cools down a little bit. And on the other side, it's also about how our society works with what is asked for and what is produced. It's, for example, with different elements, with windows, for example, they got so much cheaper in the last decades. It's with photovoltaic, for example, that is produced much cheaper because it's just asked for much more. And I'm sure it will be, for example, with wooden panels, it will be with plaster like this. It's just something that we have to change our perspective in what we really need. If we always looking for the things that the industry gives us, it will be always like a donkey following the carrot. It's always like, okay, the next iPhone and the next car and the next television or whatever. But the more people are stepping back and saying, okay, but actually I don't need the next iPhone, then it changes something. And it might be always just a few people, but it's getting more and more. And it's the same with building industry, I'm quite sure. It makes sense to ask for products that are from the region, and it makes sense to use materials from there and to make the companies that are using these materials stronger and make them grow and others down. So yeah, I think in all the topics in our life, it's more or less the same. It's always the small steps that make a long way at the end.
Not only architects, but the whole society should aim for the right path to affect the future in a positive way. And what do you think, where should we start with this to get to this right track to affect the future?
Well, I think like everywhere, it's about education. Again, all the topics in our life only make sense if we have the right education and are able to give this education to the next generations, so to make them understand what things are about. And it's like with politics, if you don't have the people who understand what they are voting for, the whole democracy doesn't make any sense. It's with everything in life. If you don't know what you should choose for, well, then you choose what you are told to. And the only way of getting your own experiences and your own way of thinking is to make people understand what the things are behind all the mechanisms. And well, it's just something that wasn't very developed the last decades. Before it was just natural because nobody thought about buying some, I don't know, some bricks from China or some windows from whatever. And suddenly everything was affordable and everything could come from everywhere. So now it's the time that we have to learn that there are also other aspects that we should look at, not just what we can get and how cheap we can get it. And therefore, also maybe with the questions before about building costs. The problem nowadays is really that we are always longing for more. It's not that it's more expensive, that wouldn't be the problem. The problem is always that people want much more than they can afford. So it's with every project that I'm getting, if it comes to the costs, it's always that people want about 30 to 50% more than they can afford. It's just like that. It's a part of human nature. So what we really should think about is, okay, if I only have this amount of money, it should not be about, okay, but I want twice as big my house or my flat or whatever, but I can't just afford this, so I have to see how I can bring in the difference by using twice as cheap materials. So this is what's happening right now. The question should be, okay, if I just can afford this, maybe I should be just happy with that and make this in a way that I can also be happy in a way that it is built with. But for example, in Austria, all the things that we were building the last decades were only produced because the need of space always grows. It's not that we are getting more people. It's only that every people needs a bigger amount of square meters. And that's why we are producing all this that we are drawing and building. And we really have to think about, okay, does it really make sense to give all the other things just for this aspect of luxury of a few square meters? Or would it maybe our life work even better if we have a smaller flat, but therefore some common spaces where we can meet together and learn to know other people and have some social interacts, like physical interacts, not only with Facebook and whatever. Yeah, of course, in the moment we are in a time where it's everything so comfortable, everything so easy to grab, it's only everything just with pressing some buttons. But I'm sure we will very soon head into a time where it will be not that comfortable anymore, because it will just not last like this for a very long time. And then it starts to get really, maybe really ugly. Maybe we just can be able to change our mind and to flatten this a bit, or but it will have to change for sure. I think everybody who has a look into the future sees that already. Maybe not everybody is honest enough to tell it or to understand it, but for sure it will be like that. And we will not be on some island somewhere in the middle of Europe where things will not touch us. It will touch us really strong. Everything that we are doing now will infect us and our everyday life and the life of our children and so on. So yeah, it's about every day that we have to do decisions in a different way, and maybe it's already too late. It could be, but yeah, still we don't have any other possibilities. So that's why we have to act right now. And to the question, how we can we change it? I think it's so much about education, not only here. I mean, you are already on a very high level of education, and you are a few compared to our society. But it's so much about the little ones, starting to teach them in kindergarten, in primary school, what things are about, how they should behave, how they should act with waste and with energy and with water and with all the resources that we have, and to make them understand what are the differences. And only this will give us the key to change our future, I think.
With this kind of mission, perhaps we can close our discussion. I would say I would only add that the most important tool for finding the right track might be or should be the critical thinking. And I hope that this kind of discussions, this kind of projects could help you, us, to work on our critical thinking and to use it for a better understanding of the world. So I hope this will help you and us in future. Juri, thank you very much for your wonderful lecture and all the beautiful responses you gave us and the ideas. Thank you very much.
Thank you.